I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
How's it going, everyone? Tableslam here. I'm just going to jump right into it. How hard is Feral DPS really in Wrath of the Lich King Classic? Well, short answer, it depends. I know, it's a cop-out. Huge cop-out. But it really does depend. It's subjective because different people find things difficult for different reasons. Even though I can't truthfully answer that question for you specifically because I don't know you, I don't know your preferences, I don't know what you think is difficult and what you think is easy. What I can do is I can tell you a little bit about Feral, and you can decide for yourself whether you think it sounds hard. I can point out a few things about Feral that people look at when they are talking about it being hard, and we can consider all of those things as a whole, and you can make your own decision. So a little bit of background on Feral DPS in general. Some of this is going to involve rogues as well because some of it's related to energy. Energy used to generate on a tick system. Every 2 seconds you would get a tick of 20 energy. That's how it worked in Vanilla and TBC all the way through. Starting in Wrath pre-patch, they changed energy generation to, instead of being on a tick system of 20 energy every 2 seconds, instead you would get 1 energy every 10th of a second. And it was a constant, steady stream of energy coming in. This solved a few problems. There were times when you'd be like 1 or 2 energy short of being able to use a finishing move. So you just had to sit there and hope for some sort of proc if you had a proc that gave you bonus energy, or you'd have to wait the full 2 seconds for another tick to give yourself the energy that you would need to do the thing that you were waiting to do. That was kind of annoying. That would happen to rogues, it would happen to ferals as well. Obviously the big thing for feral specifically was power shifting. There was a talent, it's called Furor. It's a 5-point talent. And the way that it used to work was with 5 out of 5, you'd enter cat form and you'd start at 40 energy instead of 0. Normally, without the talent, you enter cat form and you're at 0 energy. But with 5 out of 5 Furor, you'd start at 40. On top of that, if you had a Wolf's Head helm, which is a level 40 crafted BOE leatherworking helm, when shapeshifting into cat form, the druid gains 20 energy. And that's stacked with the talent. So what you could do is you get the helm, you get the talent, you get an add-on or a weak aura that shows you when energy ticks are going to land, and you time your power shift to right before a tick is going to land. You enter cat form, you're at 60. The tick lands, you're at 80. So imagine being short on energy and just, oops, I have 80 now. That's what power shifting was. This was an interesting playstyle. I thought it was kind of fun. It's definitely more APM heavy, for sure. Typically speaking, the more power shifts you can do in a fight, the higher your damage is going to be because you're getting more shreds out. However, this was not the way that Blizzard envisioned the class being played. I mean, think about it. A Wolf's Head helm, it's level 40. It was the Bis helm at level 60, and it was still the Bis helm at level 70 until late game. The first true upgrade to Wolf's Head wasn't until late Black Temple. So that's a little silly, obviously. Blizzard decided that they didn't want that to be a thing at 80, and the easiest way for them to fix that was to change the talent so that it doesn't grant energy when you enter form anymore. Now you retain energy when you re-enter form. The whole thing that made that talent good for power shifting is totally changed. So power shifting is no more. That was what Feral used to be. Let's start looking at what Feral is now, what we got now, and what we will continue to have going forward into Wrath of the Lich King. One of the main things that people look at when they're saying that Feral's hard is our buff and debuff durations. None of them add up. They're all staggered and stuff, and it can be kind of tough to keep track of them all and keep uptime on everything. We got Rake, which is actually worth using now. They tripled the amount of attack power scaling, so Rake is actually worth using because it actually does decent damage now, but that lasts for 9 seconds. Rip is our primary finisher that we're going to be making sure that we keep high uptime on. That is a base duration of 12 seconds. No matter how many combo points you spend on it, it's always going to be 12 seconds baseline. However, there are 2 glyphs that can extend the duration. Glyph of Rip just adds another 4 seconds onto it, making it a 16-second duration. And then Glyph of Shred extends it by a further 2 seconds every time you shred the target of your Rip, up to a maximum of 6 additional seconds. So between these 2 glyphs, we're getting an extra 10 seconds on Rip, making it a 22-second duration. So we got Rake, 9 seconds, Rip, 22 seconds. And then we have Savage Roar, which is brand new, level 75, a self-buff finishing move. It's basically our slice and dice. And you see these durations here. For 1 point, you get a 14-second buff, and then every point beyond that is an extra 5 seconds. And none of those line up with the previous 2 we just talked about. And then we got Mangle, of course, is now a 1-minute duration. That doesn't quite line up with anything. And then we have Berserk, our new offensive cooldown. Essentially, it's like Adrenaline Rush, but it's a little different. Adrenaline Rush is double energy regen. Berserk is half energy cost, so it's effectively the same thing. But that lasts for 15 seconds. So we got all these different timers. We got 9, 15, 22, and 14, 19, 24, 29, 34 for Savage Roar. None of them add up. It's actually not a bad thing for them to be staggered. You don't want your timers to all line up all the time. Two of our things that we're looking at for our durations are finishing moves, which cost combo points, and it takes time and energy and GCDs to build those combo points. So we don't want those to line up. We want those to be staggered. If Rip and Savage Roar are both going to drop at the same time, that sucks, because that means you got to pick which one you're going to refresh. So it looks like a bad thing at first because they don't line up, but we don't want them to line up. So that's not actually a bad thing at all. The thing that can get kind of weird, or that looks kind of weird, is Berserk being 15 seconds, and then Rip being 22, and Savage Roar being, 14, 19, 24, 29, 34. But again, that's actually a good thing. With Rip being 22 seconds, if you put up a Rip before you hit Berserk, you don't have to worry about refreshing Rip during Berserk. Ideally, what you want to do is make sure that you already have a Savage Roar going so that you don't have to refresh that during Berserk, and you have a Rip going ahead of that too so that you don't have to refresh Rip during Berserk, so that while Berserk is active, you can just shred and Ferocious Bite, and that's all you have to do. It takes a little bit of planning to set that up, but the fact that all of these timers are staggered like that, it's actually a good thing because, again, we don't want them to be lined up. It can be a little bit difficult to track the durations of all these. We have add-ons that track timers. We got weak auras. We got Akano's buff bars. We got all kinds of stuff that we can use to track durations of buffs and debuffs. It's not even that big a deal. You just make an aura for it or download an aura pack or something like that, and it makes it super easy to track your durations of stuff. The next thing we're going to look at is the next reason why people say that Feral's hard, and that is its lack of consistency. And people are not wrong when they say that. When they say that, they're usually talking about Primal Fury and Omen of Clarity, those two talents there. Primal Fury is the talent that gives you an extra combo point when you crit with your generators, and Omen of Clarity is the clear casting talent. Your auto attacks in cat form have a chance to proc clear casting, which makes your next ability free, which is real nice. They're both real nice talents. However, those two talents make the spec inherently inconsistent because you never know when you're going to get that crit, and you never know when you're going to get that Omen proc. So it makes it kind of difficult to predict where you're going to be at a couple of GCDs down the line on energy and combo points, because you never know. Something might be free because of Omen, and you might get a couple of extra combo points because of Primal Fury. Because of that, it makes it a little inconsistent, a little difficult to predict, a little difficult to plan around. You got to kind of be on your toes a bit, which is different from a lot of other specs. There's a lot of specs in the game where you're hitting the same buttons in the same order every cycle, and that's not always going to be the case with Feral. Sometimes you're going to have to adjust on the fly based on whether or not you get some crits or whether or not you get some Omen procs. So because of that, it is not as consistent as some other specs in the game. Now, like I said at the top, that can be good or bad depending on your perspective. It depends on what's important to you. It depends on what you want to get out of the game. That'll dictate whether or not you think that that's a good thing. I personally think that it is a good thing because it means that the spec is less likely to get boring over the course of the expansion. The rotation is not going to be the same thing every cycle. It has a pretty high likelihood of being different every cycle, which means that if I'm on my toes, I'm less likely to get bored, or at least I think so. The next thing we're going to talk about, the next reason why people say Feral is hard, is the chaos, allegedly. People are saying all kinds of wild shit about how chaotic Feral is. And honestly, not all of them are wrong, but I mostly blame this picture. Yeah. This picture's been floating around the internet for like 10 plus years. It was made by somebody who played Feral in Wrath, just to kind of poke fun at how chaotic it felt at times to play Feral and Wrath. And like, it does feel like this sometimes, like the way that this looks, it does sometimes feel that way, but it's not actually that way. Once you understand why you do certain sections of the cycle at certain times, it'll make more sense and it doesn't feel as chaotic. It's just, you're just adjusting on the fly. It is funny to depict it like this because it makes it look way worse than it actually is. Like, there's a bunch of random lines in here that don't need to be there. They're just there to make it look worse, which is kind of funny. Like, some of these don't even have arrows on them. There's just a random squiggle right next to Tiger's Fury. It's just a squiggle. There's no reason for it. It's not there for anything. It's not pointing to anything. There's no arrow. It's just there to take up space and make the whole thing look worse. But yeah, I'm not going to get into like the actual rotation or anything like that. That's not what I want this video to be. But it is not as bad as it makes it look here. The reason why there's so many arrows is because of, like I said before, the if-thens. And those if-thens exist because you're going to have different amounts of combo points going into different sections of your rotation. So if you have a different amount of combo points, you may have to shift things here and there. So there's a lot of if-thens where, like, if you're at this amount of combo points and Savage Roar is at this duration, you're probably going to have time to fit in, you know, a Rip or a Ferocious Bite or whatever. A lot of those are kind of like pattern recognition. The more you practice, you get a feel for it. And once you understand what the feel is, it makes a lot more sense, and it doesn't feel like fucking this. It doesn't feel like chaos because you're used to it, which is why practice dummies are super important. Would definitely heavily recommend hitting a training dummy as often as you can spare the time to do so. But yeah, I blame this image for making people think that Feral's chaotic, because whoever made this made it look way worse than it actually is. It's not really that bad. The next thing we're going to talk about is stats. And by stats, I mean armor pen. There's a lot of people that seem to think that early on, physical DPS is going to be pretty weak because of the lack of armor pen on gear, which is kind of true, not always. It kind of depends. It depends on the class, depends on the spec. Definitely true for specs like Marksman Hunter and Fury Warrior. Although Fury is still good early, they're just better with armor pen. Kind of same with Marks. Marks isn't bad early, they're just better with armor pen. They're a little more reliant on armor pen to increase their damage. Feral is not like that at all. Sure, armor pen helps. Armor pen will increase our damage from like auto attacks and shred and ferocious bite, because those are direct physical attacks that can be reduced by armor. But the majority of our damage is going to come from our bleeds. The heavy lifting is definitely done by Rip here. And as we talked about before, Rake gets 18% of our attack power as bonus damage, and Rip gets 30% of our attack power as bonus damage. But if we have Rip glyphed, the extra duration added by these two glyphs technically increases the bonus to the equivalent of 55%. And Rip can crit. So Rip is doing a lot of work for us in our rotation. Let's take a look at a couple of things on here. We get 2 attack power per point of strength, and we also get 1 attack power per point of agility. A couple of talents to look at. Heart of the Wild, which we're going to be taking in our build, gives us an extra 10% attack power. Survival of the Fittest, an extra 6% stats. Improved Mark of the Wild, an extra 2% stats. And of course, Blessing of Kings, an extra 10% stats. So that's an extra 6, 2, and 10% to agility and strength, which increases our attack power. In addition to that, Predatory Strikes. We get an extra 20% attack power from our weapon. And our weapons have a huge chunk of attack power on them because of the way that feral attack power works. The amount of feral attack power you get is based on the weapon you have equipped. Predatory Strikes giving us an extra 20% on top of that is enormous. And if we look here, our return for Rip is crazy. Every 1.4 attack power we have will give us an extra 1 Rip damage. And we're going to be rocking around with a ton of attack power. So our Rip damage is going to be pretty crazy. And like we said before, Rip can crit. So we don't need armor pen to do a lot of damage because of our bleeds. Our main bleed can crit, and it already bypasses armor. So we aren't reliant on armor pen. We're already getting attack power from our primary stats on all our gear, because we're getting attack power from the agility that's going to be on our gear. We're probably going to be able to gem mostly agility. We get 10 expertise from talents. We'll probably not have too much trouble getting a lot of hit, to the point where we don't need to gem for our secondary stats. We can just gem for straight agility. We're going to have a lot of attack power. We're going to have a ton of attack power. And by the time we get armor pen gear later on in the game, we're still going to be getting attack power from our base primary stats on our gear. Over the course of the expansion, it'll go up proportionally as we gain item levels. But once our secondary stats start to shift more towards armor pen, not only will we still have a crazy amount of attack power, now also we will have armor pen on top of that. So we'll go from good to even better once armor pen gets introduced into our gear. But we aren't reliant on armor pen to do really good damage, because so much of our damage already bypasses armor. So we don't need it, but it is nice to have, and it will increase our damage. But it isn't as impactful for us as ferals as it is for classes like a warrior or a marksman hunter. So there you go. Feral gearing is not difficult. There are things about feral that are difficult, but gearing is not one of them. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about in this one. But what do you think? We looked at a bunch of reasons why people say Feral's hard in Wrath. We examined them a little more closely to find out why they say that. And now I think you have enough information to decide for yourself, how hard is Feral really in Wrath Classic? Thanks for watching. Catch me on Twitch at twitch.tv/table_slam. Catch you next time.